As he rose to fascist dictatorship in Italy during the 1930s, how did the relationship between Mussolini and the Vatican grow from a rivalry to a competitive diplomacy because of the collision of the church and state?
Long before he became an Italian dictator, Benito Mussolini was an intelligent child, born in Verano da Costa, Italy, in 1883. Though he was smart, his academics suffered as he was prone to angry outbursts, which foreshadowed the violent behavior that he would exhibit later in his life. As a young adult, Mussolini was politically influenced by his father, who was an ardent socialist involved in the local government. It was because of him that Mussolini became involved with the Socialist Party as a journalist in Austria-Hungary.
This was short-lived, however, because after he advocated Italy's involvement in World War I, Mussolini was exiled and deported back to Italy, where he ditched socialism and adopted the extremist ideology of fascism. There he organized the Fascist Party, a system which he described as one that stresses the importance of the state and accepts the individual only insofar as his interests coincide with those of the state, essentially an authoritarian reign.
Mussolini knew he'd have competition for the control of Italy with the Vatican. It was the largest obstacle standing in his way. The church was a powerful institution, one which millions of the Italians he needed support from were closely involved with. Diplomacy between the two was going to be tricky, not only because Mussolini was threatening the authority of the church, but because Mussolini was an atheist trying to appeal to a Catholic public which had already looked to the Vatican for guidance. This tension between the church and the state resulted in a sort of rivalry between Mussolini and the Pope, as they both sought after control. Mussolini, however, was at a disadvantage. The Pope Pius XI had already earned the trust of Italy through their faith in the church, and was a household name. Mussolini worked diligently and quickly to reach the Pope's level of influence. He learned that he could appeal to the Italians' general fears through emotional speeches, and spoke passionately and urgently about issues that the church did not address, such as labor unrest. He also exercised power by forming a squadron of street fighters called the Black Shirts in 1919, ordering them to fight socialists and communists who he hated. He furthered his agenda on October 24, 1922, when the Black Shirts seized total control of the Italian government, an event known as the March on Rome. Mussolini believed in violent authoritarianism. In his words, either the government will be given to us or we shall seize it by marching on Rome. Mussolini was an appointed prime minister and minister of interior and foreign affairs by King Victor Emmanuel, who feared a civil war. This marked the beginning of his fascist rule, and after the speech he delivered to the Italian parliament on January 3, 1925, he officially declared himself dictator of Italy.
Diplomacy between Mussolini and Pope Pius XI was not at all uniform, it wasn't consistent, and it was riddled with agreement and disagreement and debate. And eventually, it crumbled just as quickly as it was built. It was a very peculiar alliance, actually, considering the fact that Mussolini was an atheist. One of his first pamphlets as a journalist was titled "God Does Not Exist," in which he called church officials parasites. And at the very beginning of his fascist party, one of his platforms was the requisition of church property. Mussolini then realized in order to achieve a full authoritarian dictatorship, he needed the Pope on his side. So, in 1921, after being elected to Parliament, Mussolini delivered a speech in the chamber in which he referenced the Vatican as a pillar of Italy's greatness and called for the renewed relationship between church and state. Pope Pius XI was also interested in a diplomatic relationship with Mussolini because he wanted to hold principal authority, even if it meant sharing it. Mussolini and Pope Pius also agreed in their mutual disdain for the current parliamentary system. Mussolini because of his fascist ideology, and Pope Pius because he held traditional beliefs in strict government. So, on February 11, 1929, the Pope and Mussolini solidified their cordial relationship with the passage of the Lateran Accords. cordial relationship between Mussolini and the Pope would exist for almost 2 decades. It's also important to note that Mussolini only saw the Pope in person once, because regardless of their relationship, he still refused to visit the Vatican because of his anti-clerical views. Though the two were allied, the Pope still took some issue with Mussolini. He greatly disapproved of his budding relationship with Hitler in the 1930s. He really did have an influence on the already rickety diplomacy between Mussolini and the Pope. Their diplomacy was not simple, it was very back and forth, and so Hitler comes in as a sort of third-party influence, and he has an advantage that the Pope does not, and that is that he can relate to Mussolini through the ideology of fascism. So these two dictators are fascist, and that allows for a gateway to sort of open up for Hitler to impact Mussolini in a way that the Pope can't.
Hitler's boyfriend, the deflated Mussolini, was carted off to Germany by plane following his rescue by Nazi paratroops. Captured enemy films show he was whisked off to become a Nazi stooge. At Hitler's headquarters, the comedy of errors reached a peak of buffoonery.
Pope Pius really disliked Hitler because of his de-Christianization policies in Germany, his anti-Catholic policies, his eradication of Catholic Church, Catholic trust, staging of the morality trials. Mussolini could easily be influenced by Hitler, and so that's the Pope's major worry, right? And so I think the final straw comes when Mussolini introduces the racial laws in Italy. Exactly. What the Pope is basically watching is he's seeing Mussolini be influenced by Hitler, even taking on anti-Semitism when it's not even relevant. Right. It really demonstrates the amount of power that Hitler had over Mussolini, which scared the Pope a lot. Right, and I think it's also important to note, the Pope wasn't really concerned about what the policy said, what the racial laws said, because, he was the head of a largely anti-Semitic institution, so it was way more about what's going to happen next. We're going to de-Christianize Italy now. And so the Pope decides to take a final stand at the 10th anniversary of the Lateran Accords. It's super interesting because that speech wasn't delivered. That meeting didn't happen because Pope Pius died the very day before that speech was supposed to be given. And while he was old, his health was failing, there are a lot of theories about it, especially because the day after he died, Mussolini ordered all copies of the speech to be destroyed. And that demonstrates the debate that took place as well. While they could be cordial and they did cooperate, they were not always diplomatic, and Hitler really did have a big part in that. Right, and I think we learn all of this through, Mussolini's correspondence with the Pope and the Pope's correspondence. Their letters. Right, and Mussolini with Hitler, and it's interesting too because this is something that's not largely talked about, and it's something that could have changed the course of history. Like, if Pope Pius XI got to deliver that speech, the course of World War II, the course of the history of Italy, the world could be changed. It could have all been completely different. Yeah.